Eugene O'Neill and Arthur Miller formed the bedrock of American drama. Both men secured their place in the pantheon by dissecting the American dream and the families struggling to survive it. But Tennessee Williams, the third pillar of this foundation, operated with a raw, agonizing subjectivity. He treated his stage characters as direct extensions of his own psyche. The director Elia Kazan, who brought many of Williams's greatest hits to life, summarized this total lack of boundaries. Everything in his life is in his plays, and everything in his plays is in his life. To understand the brilliance of what he put on stage, we must first unpack the agonizing reality of his private world. Born Thomas Lanier Williams III in 1911, his early years in Mississippi were defined by severe physical vulnerability. A case of diphtheria nearly killed him as a young child, leaving him frail and housebound for an entire year of recuperation. This physical weakness infuriated his father, Cornelius. A traveling shoe salesman with a vicious temper and a severe drinking habit, Cornelius openly mocked his son's perceived effeminacy and turned the family home into a gauntlet of verbal and physical abuse. On the other side was his mother, Edwina, overbearing, locked in a miserable marriage, and hyper-focused on her fragile son. Trapped between them, young Thomas formed a fiercely protective bond with his older sister, Rose, who was shown the early signs of a severe mental illness. To survive this suffocating domestic trap, he adopted the pen name Tennessee, masking his traumatic upbringing behind a new Southern identity. He began writing prodigiously, typing late into the night to finish one story a week, but the domestic pressure followed him into adulthood. After Tennessee failed a military training course in college, Cornelius pulled him out of school entirely and forced him to work the assembly line at the International Shoe Company. The numbing 9-to-5 repetition of the factory floor wore him down. Combined with the relentless pressure he put on himself to write all night, the exhaustion shattered him. By his 24th birthday, he suffered a total nervous breakdown and quit. He spent the next decade struggling in obscurity. Then, at age 33, he debuted a memory play in Chicago called The Glass Menagerie. It transferred to Broadway, and overnight he became a national sensation. The play was a near-literal transcription of his youth. The overbearing mother, Amanda, was Edwina. The narrator, desperate to escape, Tom, was Tennessee. And the fragile, deeply anxious sister, Laura, was Rose. But just as the play was finding its audience, his real family reached a breaking point. Rose's behavior had become increasingly erratic. In 1943, she was subjected to a lobotomy, a disastrous surgical procedure that left her institutionalized for the rest of her life. Williams was devastated. The guilt of leaving his sister behind to face that fate haunted him continuously, becoming the engine for his lifelong dependence on alcohol and prescription drugs. He channeled that agony directly into his next major work. In 1947, he released his magnum opus, A Streetcar Named Desire. The play dominated the culture, cementing his reputation globally. Once again, the script was built from the bones of his family. The character of Blanche Dubois, descending tragically into madness, was a manifestation of Rose's deterioration and a projection of Tennessee's own terror of going insane. On the other side of the stage stood Stanley Kowalski. He was built from the DNA of the brutal, hyper-masculine men Tennessee had worked alongside at the shoe factory, combined with the violent, dominating temper of his own father. He took his family's darkest, most painful secrets and put them under the brightest lights on Broadway. That exposure won him a Pulitzer Prize. And in a cruel, beautiful irony, the wealth generated by staging his trauma finally gave him the means to pay for Rose's private psychiatric care. As the 1940s gave way to the 50s, Williams began traveling widely and exploring his homosexuality. During this time, he met an occasional actor and former Navy sailor named Frank Merlo. Merlo became the operational center of Williams' life. He took on the role of personal secretary, managing the daily domestic details that overwhelmed the playwright. More importantly, Merlo's steady presence acted as a powerful counterbalance to Tennessee's frequent bouts of depression. Their relationship provided a 14-year stretch of stability. Operating from a modest house in Key West and an apartment in Manhattan, Williams entered the most productive, acclaimed era of his entire career. Merlot functioned as the essential structural support in Williams's life. He was the anchor that kept the playwright's volatile psyche tethered to the reality of daily survival. That tether snapped in 1963. After a brief separation caused by infidelities and drug abuse on both sides, Merlot was diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer. Williams returned to care for him, but Merlot died that September. The loss pushed Williams into a nearly catatonic state of depression. Desperate for relief, he submitted to regular injections from Dr. Max Jacobson, a physician infamously known as Dr. Feelgood. This diagram illustrates the dangerous chemical feedback loop that took over his body. Jacobson pumped Williams full of concentrated amphetamines to combat his depression. But the stimulants caused severe insomnia, which Williams then counteracted by taking massive doses of Seconal, a powerful barbiturate sedative, just to force sleep. Without Merlot to ground him, the drugs hijacked his mind. His writing routine never stopped. He still wrote every single day, but the sharp focus that defined his early masterpieces vanished. He spent the next 20 years releasing a string of plays that were almost universally panned as box office failures. By his 60s, Williams was living a largely isolated existence in New York City. He was consumed by a fear of aging, battered by years of negative press, and entangled in volatile, destructive relationships that only deepened his loneliness. The end arrived in a hotel suite in 1983. At 71 years old, Williams died alone. The medical examiner reported that he had choked to death on the small plastic cap of a nasal spray bottle, a cap he had been using to portion out and ingest his barbiturates. We still perform his plays today because they possess an authenticity that cannot be faked. Tennessee Williams took the chaos, the abuse, and the profound mental anguish of his own life and painstakingly translated it for the public. He turned his personal purgatory into a public triumph, bleeding his reality onto the stage so the world could understand the human soul.